Do you hear colors? Can you taste certain words? Do days of the week or months of the year have a color or a 3D spatial structure? Do numbers evoke emotions or even have certain personalities for you? Do you feel real physical pain, not just emotional pain, if you see someone else get hurt? If you said yes to any of these questions, you might just be a synesthete. Synesthesia is when one sensory experience automatically elicits the stimulation of another one, resulting in a functional kind of crossing of wires across sensory modalities that typically aren't inherently linked. While it was originally thought to be extremely rare, most likely because we weren't recognizing the milder end of the synesthesia spectrum, we now know it affects roughly 2 to 4% of the human population. Now, last week, I talked about savant syndrome, which often co-occurs with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Interestingly, a lot of savants also have synesthesia, so I thought this would make a great follow-up video. Now, the intensity of this cross-wiring in synesthesia can vary by person. Some people may have extremely strong stimulation of the secondary sense, which, depending on the type of synesthesia, can sometimes even be somewhat disabling. Now, for instance, I knew a young woman many years ago who had chromesthesia, in which she would see colors with many different types of sounds. Unfortunately, the color sensations could be extremely distracting and sometimes even painful for her, such as glaring white light flashing before her eyes whenever she heard a baby cry. Now, thankfully, most people don't experience synesthesia to this extreme, and so most usually aren't disabled by the condition. Instead, it often enhances aspects of people's lives and may even be a boon to their creative pursuits like art or music. Daniel Tammet, a well-known autistic mega savant who I discussed last week, also has number form synesthesia, which is when numbers are experienced as shapes or mental maps. Daniel's reported that every number up to 10,000 for him has a unique form and lies on a unique location in space, and even has personalities, which has aided his memorization of the number pi to over 22,000 decimal places. I myself have a very mild form of synesthesia in which months of the year have a spatial location, size, and color. I've taken the time to illustrate what I experience in the image above. The months are represented as boxes ordered chronologically, much as you would see in a calendar, but they also have unique sizes and shapes. And actually, this illustration doesn't show that I also see them at an angle, as if they're lying flat on a surface, but running off at a right angle into the distance. I've also shown the summer months here twice so you can appreciate that the visualization is continuous, almost like a perpetual ticker tape. Most of the colors have holiday associations, which probably most people can appreciate, but there are also some months whose colors don't have much rhyme or reason, like the grayness of November, the blackness of December, or the red of May. Mind you, I don't know why December is black, because I don't have any particularly negative associations with it. In fact, I quite like the holidays, but December is nevertheless black for me. There's also a large black dividing line between December and January, marking a division between the 2 years. My experience of the days of the week are somewhat similar, although the color associations are weaker, and some days of the week don't have colors, so my experience with them is more about location, size, and even height. Wednesday, however, is very yellow for some reason, and Monday is also rather red. But anyways, other than that, that's my really somewhat boring form of synesthesia. And since I'm not a calendar calculator, it's not especially useful either. Now, there's a whole bunch of different theories about how synesthesia occurs, but the ones with the most supporting evidence are the cross-activation hypothesis and the disinhibited feedback hypothesis. Now, the cross-activation hypothesis states that synesthesia results from an increase in connectivity between brain areas that process different types of sensory information. There have been some neuroimaging studies on synesthetes that does lend support for this hypothesis, showing an increase in structural connectivity between these sensory modalities that tend to get crossed. But there's also some supporting evidence for the disinhibited feedback hypothesis too, which proposes that synesthesia is a result of reduced inhibition in feedback pathways between different sensory areas. And synesthetes do exhibit differences in how their brains inhibit sensory information. So in all likelihood, the truth is probably some kind of combination of these two hypotheses, and it's even possible that increased connectivity may lead to a reduction in inhibition between these areas. So it very well could be two sides of the same coin, so to speak. Now, there's a bunch of different types of synesthesia, and the ones I'm going to discuss are just the major ones, but this list isn't exhaustive. The two most common types of synesthesia are grapheme color synesthesia, where the individual experiences sensations of color in association with letters and or numbers, and then there's chromesthesia, which is when sounds evoke the perception of color, like with the example of the young woman who had the experience with the baby crying and seeing the bright flashing white light. There's also another type, like lexical gustatory synesthesia, which is where words can trigger taste sensations. Now that type is pretty rare. There's also spatial sequence synesthesia, where number sequences, dates, or time occupy specific spatial locations relative to each other, such as my calendar and weekday examples. Then there's ordinal linguistic personification, and this is where numbers, days of the week, months of the year can have personalities or even genders. There's number form synesthesia, where numbers have specific spatial patterns and or shapes and sometimes even textures, like in the case of Daniel Tammet's version of synesthesia. Next, we have mirror touch synesthesia, where the person experiences a tactile sensation on their own body when seeing someone else having a tactile experience, such as when they're being touched or even hurt. And finally, there is auditory tactile synesthesia, and that's where sounds can trigger tactile sensations on different parts of the body. So those are the basics of synesthesia. Do you have synesthesia? And if you do you also have any savant-like talents? Let me know in the comments. Well, anyways, it's that time again to wrap up for another week. Thanks again for joining me on this foray into this fascinating and inordinately complex map of the human brain. It's really awesome when we get to explore this with something like synesthesia. Let me know if you have any additional comments, any questions about this. I'm not an expert in synesthesia or savantism, but as always, I try my best, and if I don't know, I'll go in search of the answer. So anyways, until next time, take care, and and have a happy holiday if you're in the U.S. And if you're not, have a happy holiday anyways. Take a holiday. Have a nice holiday. So anyways, take care and ciao.